What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a book that I recently finished reading, Essential Daredevil, Volume 4. This collects Daredevil, issues 75 through 101, and Avengers, issue 11. This collects most of Jerry Conway's run on Daredevil. I know the very beginning of his run was in Volume 3. Pretty much this entire book is Jerry Conway, except for like the last 4 issues, which are by Steve either Gerber or Gerber. I've always said Gerber, but I'm not really sure how to pronounce that man's name. And the last like 2 or 3 issues of Conway's run were actually co-plotted by Gerber. And then he just started writing the book on his own. And this book has some things about it that I like and some things about it that I don't like. One of the things that I really like, this book finally takes Daredevil away from New York City and puts him in San Francisco. Yay. I am always down for it when any book in the Marvel Universe or any creator in Marvel Comics takes a character away from New York City and puts them somewhere else. I've always thought it was stupid that the entire Marvel Universe exists in New York City at the same time. And I understand it's because originally the offices of Marvel Comics were located in New York City, so instead of trying to fake it and say, yeah, we'll have this character be set in Jacksonville, Florida, even though none of us have ever been to Jacksonville, Florida, then you're going to have audiences who are going to say, hey, that doesn't look like Jacksonville, Florida. These guys are just making it up. Instead of doing that, or instead of creating their own city like Gotham City or Metropolis, they wanted it to look real. They wanted it to feel real. So their only option, since everyone working at Marvel was located in New York City, at least when the Silver Age of Marvel got started, they just had every comic book set in New York City. And then that also makes it a little easier if you're running out of ideas in Daredevil this month and you want Spider-Man to swing by, then you can have Spider-Man come by really quickly because they both live in the same city and it's not going to feel too far-fetched. I get that. I still think it's really stupid that the entire Marvel Universe exists in the same city. So I was very okay with Daredevil finally moving to California, specifically San Francisco. And the reason that he does that is another thing that I really like about this book. This run, Jerry Conway's run, finally does away with Karen Page as a character. It doesn't kill her or anything, but basically, as of the end of Essential Volume 3, Karen was pursuing a career as an actress. Well, then, at the end of that book and at the beginning of this book, Daredevil, he finds out where she is. She's in California. He goes to try and pursue a relationship with her some more, and basically, very briefly, they both kind of rekindle their relationship, and then in the span of an issue, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't going to work out, we're not going to work out with each other, we're no good for each other, and then Karen stops appearing in the book, and I was very, very okay with that, because I did not like the character of Karen Page in this comic. Most of the time, especially under the hand of Stan Lee, and even to a degree under the hand of Roy Thomas, who followed up Stan Lee, not Gwen Stacy, wow, very different character. Karen Page was basically just the token girl of the book. She didn't really have much of a personality on her own, especially in the early days. Her only personality was, I'm in love with Matt, but he's blind, and I just can't become his caretaker. I would only really be able to get with him if he was cured of his blindness. So there were several times in the early days where she was trying to get him to get surgery to cure his blindness, and of course he didn't want to do that because then he would lose his powers, and it was just this big melodrama going on. Finally, this book just gets rid of her. And by this point, Karen is starting to be written a little bit more like a real human being and not just the token girl of the book, but it was too little too late by that point. I did not care for the character even when they started giving her a real personality, so I was just about cheering and doing backflips whenever this book got rid of her. The bad news is, moving Daredevil to California and getting rid of Karen Page, they kind of just quietly got rid of Foggy Nelson. There was one point, it was earlier in this volume, where Matt, Karen, and Foggy are all at this party in California, and this is right before, like immediately before Karen's written out of the book, and I was thinking, okay, it's a little weird that Foggy is here because the last I heard, he was district attorney in New York City, but I thought, you know what, that's fine, he's obviously not going to stay district attorney forever. I was pretty sure that at some point, Matt and Foggy were going to get back together and reform Nelson and Murdoch, so I was thinking, okay, maybe that happens here. Maybe Foggy quits being district attorney, or or he's subpoenaed, or he's impeached or something like that, and then he leaves New York and comes to California to restart the law firm of Nelson and Murdoch. No, they kind of just quietly sweep Foggy under the rug, and then they don't mention him anymore. In fact, once Foggy stops appearing in this book, I don't think that Daredevil ever mentions him anymore. It's like he never even had a friend named Foggy Nelson, and that was a little weird, and I like Foggy. I wanted to like Foggy, and I wanted to see him be more of a presence in the series, because when he wasn't part of the stupid love quadrangles and love triangles from the earlier days of this comic, I actually really liked him as a character. And when he had his own romantic love interest, and he was no longer at odds with Matt over who should get with Karen Page, I liked him quite a bit. And I was sad to see that he wasn't going to be in this book anymore because of Matt moving to California. Now, I know later on they do bring Foggy back, so I'm going to be interested to see how they do that. But really, I like that they take Matt out of the setting of New York City. I just wish they could have found a way to do that and bring Foggy with him. Since they lose basically all of the supporting characters that this series had, Karen Page and Foggy Nelson, they add some new supporting characters to this book. One is the Black Widow, who is basically Matt's new love interest. And I have mixed feelings on this. On the one hand, I feel like it works really good in theory, but in practice it doesn't work as well. This was around that time when I think the writers and creators at Marvel were realizing that most of the female characters at their company weren't written very well. They were all just kind of the token girl, as I talked about earlier. Sue Storm, Betty Ross, I would say the Spider-Man books are kind of the exception to this rule, because in Spider-Man you had multiple women, and most of them were written differently. So Liz Allen was written very differently from Betty, I cannot remember her name from the Spider-Man comics. It's completely left my mind. Gwen Stacy, all of those characters were kind of written different from each other. So I would say the Spider-Man book was the exception to the rule. But you had Sue Storm, Jean Grey, all these characters were basically just the token girl in a team full of boys, and they didn't really have much of a personality of their own. If you go to the X-Men, you know that Beast is the smart one, Angel is the handsome one, Iceman is the immature one, Jean is the female one. She doesn't really have that one thing to hang on her character to make her unique from everybody else, other than physically she's a woman. This book, right around this time in the late 60s, early 70s, I think the writers were starting to see that as a problem in their books, so they were trying to fix that. And in getting rid of Gwen Stacy, they had a chance, basically a clean slate, to try and start over and maybe do better on having their female character be more than just the token woman. So you have Black Widow, who is, in a way, kind of Marvel's representation of female empowerment, I guess you could say, at this point in Marvel Comics. And in a way, I like it. I like that Black Widow is not just passively always, oh, I wish that Matt would love me, I wish that I could fall in love with him like Karen Page was in the early 60s. I'm glad that they're not doing that with her character. But the problem is, I feel like they're still writing Daredevil as if he exists in the 1950s. He is he's portrayed very chauvinistically in this book. Daredevil will go out and he'll be patrolling around the city, and she'll be with him, and fortunately, she knows that he's Matt Murdock, so that's one bit of melodrama that this book is not dealing with. They're not trying to have Matt hide his secret identity from her while he's dating her. That would have been a big, huge mess, and I'm glad that this book just completely skipped over that. But they'll be out patrolling, and then he'll say something like, hey, you take that side, and I'll take this side. And then she'll say, I'm a woman, mister, and I'm my own woman. I'll do whatever I want. And she's almost just rude about it. And sometimes, rightly so. Sometimes Daredevil kind of treated her like he was a man of the 1950s and she was his property almost. And then sometimes it was undeserved. Sometimes he would say something like, hey, be careful, because when you're dating someone, you care about that someone and you don't want them to be hurt. And then when he would say, be careful, she would take offense to that like he was insulting her or something. And this entire book is filled with that. I cannot think of a single issue in this book where there's not some sort of tense hostility going on between these two because of her being a new liberated woman and Daredevil just not being able to understand that. I like the idea of Matt dating someone other than Karen Page. I like the idea of bringing the Black Widow into this book. She was a character who's kind of just hanging around in the comics before now. She had been in the Avengers comic a little bit, and I don't know what her dating history was. At one point, she fights Hawkeye, or no, she doesn't fight him. Daredevil fights Hawkeye. Basically, both of them are acting like like Schwavinist, saying like, she's mine, no, she's mine, and then they kind of get in fisticuffs over who owns the Black Widow, and once again, she kind of tells them both off, saying that it's her choice, and she may not choose either one of them the way they're acting. And, I don't really know much about the character before she started showing up here, but I like the idea of taking an existing superhero character and making her Matt's love interest. I think that could have worked very well. The problem is, if you read this book, there is absolutely no indication that either of these two even like each other. We are told that they have this love for each other, and they are obviously, there's something there because they're dating for about 3/4 of this book, but I don't see it. I don't see any indication that these two even like each other. I can't even see any indication that they even get along with each other. Basically, these two just kind of can't stand each other, and they're always arguing with each other and yelling at each other, and I get the feeling that they want this relationship to work more than it's actually going to work. They want Daredevil to be dating this superhero woman because she's different than Karen Page, and she is different than Karen Page. But this relationship is not working because of the way that they are writing Matt and Black Widow. And I'm definitely looking forward to the point, what I would love to see, and I don't know if this is ever going to happen, because in the last half of this book, they actually changed the title of the book to Daredevil and Black Widow. So they very clearly were wanting to shake things up in the Daredevil book, and they were willing to do just about anything. Take him out of New York, take away his entire supporting cast, give him a new supporting cast, and I forgot to mention Black Widow's best friend / chauffeur, Ivan, who basically raised her since she was a little girl. He's kind of sort of the Alfred of this book now. He's not an actual butler, but he's kind of there on the side, and whenever either of these two are in trouble and they're in over their head, he will usually come in to try and rescue them. And so you've got a new supporting cast, a new setting. Old supporting cast is completely gone. They've even changed the title of the book. It's very obvious that they were wanting to shake things up and just see what would work. But I would have been okay with, after about 10 issues of these two as a couple clearly not working at all, have them break up, but have them still remain platonic friends and have them still continue to work together as superheroes. I think that could have been very interesting. Not a sidekick situation, not Daredevil training Black Widow because she obviously doesn't need training, but have them both be equal partners going out helping each other fight crime. I think that could have been very interesting, and then you can introduce a new love interest, and then maybe if you want to, you can have Black Widow be getting jealous because Matt's dating someone different. You can have drama, but it doesn't have to be so infantile and juvenile. And I feel like a lot of the drama in this book coming from the love portions of the book, the stuff coming from the relationship here, a lot of it is really juvenile because both of these characters are just acting very childish. Neither one of them are acting like they're really in love with the other one, and yet they're continuing to date each other, and I don't really understand it. And that's probably my least favorite part of the book. They got rid of Karen Page, and I was just super excited. I was ready to jump for joy, and then they introduce another love interest who, in a way, is as bad as Karen Page. Maybe that's a little harsh. Maybe she's not as bad as Karen Page, but she has her own problems that make her just about as unenjoyable to read about as Karen Page was. That is a little harsh because Karen Page was just completely awful, and Black Widow does have some redeeming qualities, but she's not a great character, and it feels to me like even though the people like Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas and other writers around this time were realizing that the female characters in these books were not being written very well, it's almost like they weren't entirely sure how to write these female characters just yet. It's kind of like we're in a transition period, and it's going to take a little bit of trial and error before they can get these characters to sound right. And it may be another 5 years before the Black Widow doesn't sound like she's jumping down everyone's throat every time they say anything because she's a new liberated woman. I'm okay with her being a new liberated woman, but every conversation that she has with Daredevil doesn't have to be an argument about her being a new liberated woman. So that's about all I had to say about this book. I know mostly I just kind of talked about the changes that this book went in from Volume 3 to Volume 4, but there was a lot to talk about there, I thought. So those are my thoughts on Essential Daredevil Volume 4. Not awful, but also not fantastic either. If you've read some of the later Daredevil stuff, if you're one of the people who you just really love Frank Miller's run, for example, which I haven't read yet, then you probably won't like this. This is not fantastic stuff. It's decent. It's better than some of the stuff that came before, but it's not the best comics that I've ever read. It's just kind of sort of middle of the road, and that sounds like a backhanded insult to it, and it's not really meant to be an insult, but it's unfortunately the truth. So those are my thoughts on this book. If you guys have read this book, let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I will be back later in the week with some other videos, so you guys be sure to check those out when they show up on your newsfeed. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.